had 25 community forums that have helped us determine the high-level attributes that we've been looking for. So you've been through this in the other room. So I think what I'd like to do is just give you a few minutes to tell the group. Well, first we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves, so you have a sense of kind of where this community is from. And then if you could just tell us a little about yourself, and then as in the other room, each person will ask a question. And Tiffany's going to keep track of our time in case we start to run out of time so that you can get through all the questions, which wasn't a problem before, but who knows. So we'll see. All right, so you're going to go ahead.
My name is Stacy Ziss, and I'm a parent, and I'm one of the chairs of the District Parent Council.
What grade are your kids in?
I have a 9th grader at Boulder High.
My name is Willie Swain. I'm a junior attending Centaurus High School.
Nice to meet you.
My name is Nancy Piercy. I am a teacher at Centaurus High School. I teach special education there, but I'm here representing the Teachers Advisory Council.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Doug Alexander. I teach 6th grade language arts at a K-8, and I'm also president-elect of the Boulder Valley Gifted and Talent.
Nice to meet you.
My name is Michael Busey. I'm a parent in the district, and I'm also one of the founders of BDC.
I'm Lori Albright, and I used to be on the school board, but I'm not anymore.
You look really happy about that.
My name is Mike Wilcox. I'm the director for student employment here at BVSD.
My name is Tiffany Lytalk, and I'm the director of educational innovation here at BVSD.
I'm Chris Meyer, principal of Brookfield Heights Middle School.
Nice to meet you.
Carrie Yancer, principal at Netherland Middle Senior High School, 18 miles outside of Boulder.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So go ahead.
Well, I'm Krish. Just joking. So, you know, I started this when I met the board for the first time. They didn't ask this question, but I answered it anyways. I wanted you to understand, and I want you to get an understanding of who I am as a person, because if you know me and what I do and where I've been, where I come from, I think you'll understand why I'm sitting in this seat, and why I'm in education, and why I'm essentially even in this country. My parents are from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm first generation. My dad grew up in extreme poverty. My mom, not so much, not much more money in her pocket either. But you know, my dad. I'd start with a story about my dad. My dad was one of the most brilliant people that I know. He still is. And he went through school, and because they saw what he had academically, he kind of got pushed into better opportunities. And so my dad graduated at the top of his class in the top high school in the country. And when it came time for him to figure out what he was going to do next, he didn't have good role models. So his parents, you know, none of my grandparents are beyond a 3rd grade educational level. And so, you know, he just did what everybody else in his village did, and he went and he worked in the oil fields. And so he did that for about 5 years. And there was one day that he was sick, and he stayed home. And there was a massive explosion in his sector, and everyone that he worked with died that day. And thankfully, he wasn't there. I wouldn't be either. He wasn't there that day, and I told you my dad is really smart. So within 2 weeks, he figured out how to get out of that country and come to America and put himself through school. My dad, at age 23, started his college career, and he didn't stop. So he came here, put himself through college, and got a bachelor's degree, continued on and got a master's degree, continued on and got a terminal degree, and then taught biology in a college for over 30 years. In between that bachelor's and doctorate, he figured at some point he wanted to go home and find a wife. I guess he wasn't doing so well here in America, so he went back to Trinidad, and he met my mom. My mom is, she was Miss Trinidad too in 1960-something, but she at the time was also a kindergarten teacher. And so my parents met, well, let me back this up. They were introduced. Sounds to me like it was an arrangement, but they say they were introduced. They met each other. The next week, my dad called on the phone. I think phones probably just came to the country. Called on the phone and asked my mom to marry him. And she said yes. And then the 3rd time they communicated in any way was their wedding. So in the course of a month, my mom went from teaching kindergarten in Trinidad at a Catholic school to living in Chicago with this stranger of a man that she married in a 1-bedroom apartment that he shared with another couple. So my mom is adventurous. My mom is also persistent. So as she came to this country, she went, and that's when she found out that she could not teach here because they wouldn't even accept her college diploma. So my mom said to my dad, I want to go back to school. My dad kind of said no. I want to have children. And so it took my mom 10 years to put herself back through college, raise 4 children, and get back to teaching. But she never gave up. And so I say that story about my parents because I learned from my dad that with education, you can escape the deepest grips of poverty. Probably why I went into low-income, working in low-income schools earlier in my career. But I learned from my dad that education is the only guarantee to a successful future. What I learned from my mom was that you can be educated and still not meet your goals in life unless you are persistent. And she faced obstacles, and she found ways around it, and she never gave up on her dream of being a teacher again. And so I had really 2 great role models. And I had great brothers, 2 brothers and a sister who were extremely smart and extremely intelligent, great role models for me. National Honor Society, scholarships to college. I'm the baby of the family, and believe me, I was the baby of the family. And so I kind of just coasted. I didn't have to work that hard because I was the last of the 4 Mohips. Everybody knew I was smart, so I got my A's and B's, and I was doing really well. Me and my sister had a really close bond and a really close relationship. She was 4 years older than me. So I was graduating 8th grade. She was graduating high school, and it was that summer. And so that summer, my sister got really sick. And in the course of 3 weeks, passed away. And that was 2 weeks before I had to start high school. My parents were a wreck. My brother had just gone. One was moved back home, and I mean, I, for 2 years, was completely depressed. And I would come home from school, I would go into my sister's room, and I would lay in bed, cry into the pillow, because the last thing I ever wanted to do was upset my mom. So I never let them know how much it affected me. And so the first 2 years of high school were a disaster for me. The only thing that saved me was I was in sports. And so I had to have a D average to play, and my coaches made sure that I got C's and D's. Otherwise, I would have failed, and I probably wouldn't have made it past sophomore year. I started coming out of that depression, and it was I was getting ready for my junior year. I was ready to pick classes, and I said to my counselor, Miss K, and I said to her, I said, Miss K, I said, I have not been working. I've been depressed. You knew that I had some struggles in my family and some tragedy in my family life, and I know I can do better. And I want to go into all honors classes like my brothers and my sister did before. And she looked at me and she said, Krish, I do believe. And she said, I believe that you are working to your full potential right now, and that you should remain in the remedial and basic classes. And with any luck, you can get a 2-year degree, but if not, maybe you should think about a skilled trade. And so it was the first time that I had come out of my shell. I went to the one adult I thought would help me and guide me, and instead, she just pushed me back down to where everyone thought I should be. And I left that meeting thinking, well, I guess this is as good as I am. And as I was walking out, tears in my eyes, I look over and I see Ken Anderson, who was my sister's counselor. And he was in charge of, in charge of the counseling department for that high school. And so he saw me and he called me into his office, and he asked me what happened, and I told him about the conversation. And he said, Krish, I have been waiting for you to believe what I believe you can do. He's like, I have been sending a woman to you to talk to you every single week, a counselor, and you have refused. Listen, I had no idea who this woman was. I was trying to talk to girls. You're interrupting my lunch. Like, just stay away. But I didn't want to talk. And I had no idea that he was doing this. So he said to me, he's like, I'm going to give you 1 semester to prove to me what I already know, that you are a high-performing child, that you are brilliant, that you are smart. And so he put me into all honors classes. For the last 2 years of high school, I was in all honors and all AP classes. I went on to college, and I got a scholarship, a presidential scholarship, and I decided at that point that I was going to do something different. My sister died from an autoimmune disease, and I sat down and I started writing an essay, and this is how I won the competition. It was an essay competition. I started writing how I was going to change the world and find the cure for the disease my sister died of. She was only the second person ever to die from it. And probably about a quarter into that essay competition, I started over. And I started writing an essay about my life and how I almost didn't make it to this table and how I can go and have great role models and parents and brothers. I went to one of the highest performing schools in the state, and I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago. And I almost didn't make it to college. If it wasn't for that one person in the school that believed in me, I was headed towards failure. And so I started writing an article really about what has become my belief in education, about how schools play an important role in the education of a child and how we have to do it just a little bit differently. I was so bored in school because I was a boy and it was kind of designed for girls. I didn't like reading and I didn't like doing homework. I liked playing with my hands. I liked science. I liked experimenting. I liked doing things like that, but that was never encouraged. And so I talked about how we can do things differently in education. And I talked and I formed my educational philosophy that day, and it's all children can learn, all children want to learn, and it's up to the adults to make it happen. And I say that because people say all the time all kids can learn, but I don't think they believe it, because if they believed it, they wouldn't then stereotype children and put children into different subgroups based on socioeconomic status. And then they say all children want to learn, but those same people that are saying that are telling me that this child needs to be removed, or this child is not engaged in class, or this child is lazy. And I always say, I think it's Aristotle said that humans are curious by nature. And I truly believe that. People want to learn. We don't always want to learn the way that we're teaching them. And so we have to find ways to engage our children as we teach. And then when I talked about a community of adults coming together, it's really about not just the school system, but the entire community rallying around our children to say, this is what our children need. I think the role of a school is to help define what those metrics are in collaboration. But then once you know where you want to go, then pull all the adults in and have every adult in the Boulder Valley understand what is it that we can do as adults to help these children meet the goals that the school district has set forward. So that's what's brought me here. That's what's brought me to Boulder Valley. And there's three other things that have kind of shifted where I want to be in the educational world and why I don't necessarily want to stay in low income. I want to work in this area. And those three reasons are Noah, Bella, and Riley. Noah and Bella are my 7-year-old twins, and Riley is my 5-year-old. And my children are extremely intelligent. They go to one of the best schools they still live in Skokie, Illinois, just outside of Chicago in the North Shore. And I didn't bring them to Ohio because I didn't want to take them out of that school district because it's such a good place for them to learn. But the struggle I had from kindergarten, first grade, and still have in second grade is the fact that my children are extremely intelligent, and I'm worried because the conversations aren't happening at the school level or the district level to say your child is reading at a 7th grade level in 2nd grade. And I've never once heard them say to me, here's what we're doing to get them to an 8th grade level. What they say to me is, Bella's a joy and a delight to have in class. She's helping all the other students. She's so curious and she's learning. And I'm like, I know all those things because we're the reason that they're doing that. I brought you a child in kindergarten, read it at a 3rd grade level, and I was watching the assessments. I'm a data geek, right? So they use Scantron. Do you guys use Scantron here before I say anything wrong about it? All right, well, I stopped using Scantron in 2005, but they're still continuing to use Scantron. And so I looked at her test score as she came into kindergarten. It was at a 99%. And at the end of the year, it was a 91%. And the teacher was telling me how great she's doing. And in my mind, I said, no, I didn't say it in my mind. I said it out loud. I said, well, she just dropped 8%. Like, that's a problem for me. And so I'm always looking for growth. And I think that might be sometimes what scares people about me. But essentially, we have to do right by children. And it doesn't matter if your child is 3 grade levels above or 3 grade levels below. You set an academic target for that child and you help them get there. And you progress monitor along the way. And when you see a child not meeting the standards, well, then you intervene. And when you see a child that's continuing to flourish, you figure out how to accelerate even more. And I know here in Boulder, the conversation will probably be more around acceleration. But when you start setting targets and measuring goals, you'll be surprised. It's oftentimes this population that has the hardest time meeting those goals. And so it really comes down to ensuring that you have a solid instructional framework, a comprehensive professional development system, a comprehensive assessment system, and accountability over all of those things to make sure as you're providing this education to children, it's having the intended outcome that it should. And I don't know what I think that was supposed to be an introduction, right? I don't know what I'm talking about at this point, but I just felt compelled to say those things. Real quickly, this is a boring resume stuff. I started out as a kindergarten teacher. I got quickly moved into administration because I was writing grants and I brought in millions of dollars for a school. I then got quickly moved into a principalship. And so all that time, though, even though as I was being pushed into administration, I still made sure that I could teach. As an assistant principal, I was teaching half the day. As a principal, I was teaching at least one period a day. I took over a school in the Pilsen neighborhood, one of the lowest performing schools in that area. Within 5 years, we were outperforming the gifted school, the regional gifted school that all the kids were bused to. We were outperforming them. We had some of of the 470 schools in the district, I outperformed 465 of them with growth. That caught the attention of the superintendent. She was putting together a transformation unit. She asked me to come in and be the deputy in that. She gave me 12 schools. I was doing a good job. She promoted me to give me more money. But I had then 24 schools. And by the end of the year, she removed the chief and made me the chief. And I was in charge of 24 of the roughest elementary schools and 12 of the roughest high schools across the entire part of Chicago. It was supposed to be a 3-year program. After 2 years, I was able to return 24 of those schools back to normal governance because they were so high performing and sustaining that growth. The 12 schools that I kept, the only reason I kept them is because they were part of the school improvement grant, which I was running for the city of Chicago at the time. And then I left because John Casey called and said he was doing a state takeover in Ohio. It would have been the first state takeover. They liked the work that I was doing in Chicago, and he asked me to come do that. And so that's what I'm doing now, but I have an interest in leaving because I'm really about education. And right now we're a little bit of a standstill there. It's not about education, it's about adults, politics have gotten really strong and it's getting in the way of children. But what I have done is I've built a sustainable practice that could be continued. So, in the last 4 months, the first 4 months, we saw our reading scores improve by 5%, our math scores improve by 4.5%. I expect that to double by the end of this year. And as we continue this, whether I'm in that role or not, hopefully not, we will continue to see growth there. So that's what brings me here. That's a little bit of who I am, what I'm about, what I believe, and what I've done.
Okay, let's start with the first question. And you've sort of already answered some of it, but BVSD's gifted education programming is limited when compared to other school districts in Colorado. How might you, as superintendent, bring more attention and focus to the needs of gifted students and strengthen our district's gifted education program?
So again, I would have to take a look at funding. I'd have to look at what the opportunities are and what we're doing with gifted education. I would also look to see is how are we integrating just differentiation of instruction throughout the school day. So a child shouldn't have to be pulled out of the classroom specifically to get gifted instruction to move them forward. How do we incorporate that during the normal school day when kids are with their peers so that we can differentiate? I see that happening a lot of times through small group instruction when kids are working in centers, when in districts like this, and I've built this in other, in much difficult areas, where kids can work and collaborate and build interdependence upon each other for long periods of time, while teachers can then pull groups while working together. So I think part of it is seeing what is the opportunity to expand. I think there is benefits to pulling kids out and providing talented and gifted education to them and really accelerating that growth, but also how do we incorporate some of that into just the regular school day. One thing that I've done in all the places I've been is I have built out within the time distribution of the day an intervention and acceleration period in every classroom. So K to 8, like right now what I've done, K to 4 has 80 minutes within their day and 5 to 8 has 60 minutes where students are either working in intervention groups or acceleration groups depending upon what they need. And essentially it's just meeting the children where they are, building that plan and helping them grow towards the expected outcome. Thanks.
What is one thing that we must stop doing in education to prepare our students for the future? What is one thing we should continue to do? What is one thing we must start doing?
So what should we stop, what should we start, and what should we continue?
Yes.
That is the hardest question I've had all day. So I think what we should stop and what we should do are almost the same thing. It all comes down to expectations. So I think a lot of times we don't give our students enough credit. I don't think we give them enough credit for, look at Parkland right now. Like, those students right now are doing something that the adults haven't been able to do in 50 years. They are now leading this country. And so a lot of times we shouldn't be surprised that high school students are at the forefront of change in our country, but we are. And people are saying, oh, this is wonderful, the children are doing this, but we've lowered our expectations to the point where this is surprising to us. So it's something I've always done. I've always had student advisory councils in all my high schools. And what I learned from those students is shocking. Because almost every time I have a challenge that we can't solve, I go to the students and they typically will give me the answer. And so something we need to stop doing is lowering expectations. Something we need to start doing is listening to our children. And something that we need to continue is making sure that we provide high quality instruction to every kid every day. You're going to hear me say that. You'll get sick of me saying that. But essentially that's what has to happen, because it can never be okay for a child to come to school and get low quality instruction.
What are your thoughts on student political activism during the school day? And to what extent is that appropriate?
Well, I think you kind of know where I stand a little bit. But I think political activism is important. I think students need to be able to voice their concerns. They need to be able to be heard. They have to have voice in their education. However, it can't be counterproductive to the learning environment, and it can't replace instructional time. But I do think that you can build these things into the instructional day. And so I think something that's really important for children is to understand how to have academic discourse, and how to debate, and how to converse in such a way that they can be disagreeable but still get their point across. And so when I was 2007, when I was looking for a switch to how we taught, I gravitated towards the gradual release of responsibility, for the mere fact that the majority of that time is when children talk to each other and learn from each other. And so when I thought of how I learned in college, I didn't necessarily learn in the classes, didn't always show up. I learned at the dining room table, or at my buddy's dorm room, as we sat around and we talked and we taught each other. And if I know that's how I need to, if that's how we learn in college, then how are we preparing our kindergartners for that? So as early as kindergarten, I want children to understand how to learn from each other, how to talk to each other, how to engage, how to debate, how to argue, but then how to have perseverance to stay within a task for an extended period of time. So in kindergarten, maybe it's 5 minutes that they're working in that type of setting, but I want to build that up to be able to be an hour or an hour and a half as they start getting older, where they're not relying on a teacher to tell them the answer. I think that's such a better way to learn. I think it's how we learn as adults, and I think as you enter into the workforce, you would lose your job if every 5 minutes you had to go and ask your boss a question on how to do something. Typically you work with a group, and you have to come to a consensus, and you have to solve that problem collaboratively. And the new added challenge now is we not only have to teach children how to do that, but we have to teach children how to do that virtually. When you look at the work world, so many projects are done from across the country where people just kind of Skype in and work together. So how are we building the capacity for children not only to work together, but then also work together in a collaborative, virtual way?
Okay, question 4. Please outline what you believe would be a comprehensive plan to ensure that all children with dyslexia and BVSD receive the support they need in K-12 across Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3.
You guys do MTSS in this district, or something you do MT? Okay. So I think the very first thing is you have to recognize that dyslexia is a serious issue in our country. When you look at the rates of dyslexia, I believe it's, I've seen anywhere from 5 to 15% of the population have have dyslexia. And then when you look at how many children are below level in reading, one of the main deterrents or one of the main factors in that is some type of learning disability. But so often, I face this challenge in Chicago, I face this challenge in Ohio. It's something that we don't even put on our radar. We don't look for it, we don't screen for it, and once we even know that that we've never trained our teachers how to work with students with dyslexia. I don't know what you guys have done here in Boulder, but we have to make sure that our teachers know how to recognize it. We have to make sure, once we recognize it, we know how to diagnose it and make sure the diagnosis is correct. And then we have to make sure that we have the resources in place in every single classroom so that children can go and be in that classroom and not have to be pulled out special because they have dyslexia. We don't want to shine more attention to it. Just every teacher needs to be trained on how to work with children with dyslexia, much like our teachers should know how to work with all children that have learning disabilities. It's the purpose of an IEP. It's the purpose of an IEP team. And it really then goes down to the accountability to make sure that everybody in the school district who services that child has copies of the IEP, knows the goals of the IEP, contribute to the success of that child, and really does work in coordination with the special ed teacher to provide the accommodations or modifications that are needed. I think so often we just kind of push that responsibility off to a special education teacher, and we don't own it for ourselves. I've seen so many times where they get labeled as those are the special ed children, those are your students, you teach them, and I'm going to teach everyone else. And I mean, hopefully that's not the case here, but I've seen that. I've seen the transformation. And right now I'm working in a school district on a corrective action plan from the state that I think I'm trying to be nice, but everyone should have been fired when I walked in. When I saw that, I asked the state, how could you have allowed this to happen for so long? And I don't mean that to scare anybody, but when you ignore a problem for so long, like needs of special education students in a district, and I was really disappointed in the state of Ohio that they allowed it to carry on for so long. So we're on a corrective action plan, we're on processes of doing it. The struggle is, my biggest struggle right now is, as far as compliance, that's all good. Compliance you could fix in 6 months. It's getting people to buy in, to understand, and to really have to really get behind the policies and the philosophies of teaching all children, including those that receive special education services.
Mr. Mohip, you have about 20 minutes.
BVSD has a reputation statewide for bold action and strong advocacy for improving student outcomes. We have embarked on several forward-thinking district-wide initiatives to advance learning and push achievement to new levels in public education. What qualities do you bring to the position that will leverage our voice in wider circles to improve education overall?
So is the question what I can do to actually have that happen, or to celebrate what's happening here in Boulder?
I'm not the author of the question.
Gotcha. Well, I'll answer both, because I'm not sure what I'm trying to answer. I will say, I sit here coming to you with a national, I have a national exposure to superintendents across this country. My network is very deep. When there was a Parkland shooting, I know him. I kind of been known. Being in that position in Chicago Public School has introduced me to so many people across the country. So people look to me now because I've kind of become known as a little bit of a transformation specialist. So as districts are struggling with how do you accelerate growth for some of the lowest performing populations, I get calls quite a bit, and I help districts kind of build a plan. What I really want to say to you, though, is what we have to do here in Boulder doesn't always have to be like this newest and greatest idea. It doesn't have to be some innovative approach. Essentially what it comes down to, and what I've learned along the way, is it's really investing in best practices instruction and holding people accountable for that. And accountable, when I say accountable, don't think capital A accountable. I'm accountable just making sure people are doing it, checking in on it. But what I've learned is that sometimes going back to basics is not a bad thing. And what I mean by going back to basics, it's going back to making sure that your teachers are teaching through an instructional framework that's been adopted either district-wide or by the building. I think it's really important to have expectations, whether it's in a building or whether it's in a district, to say, this is what teaching looks like. And once you have that understanding of what teaching looks like, then you have to operationalize that to say, this is what it looks like at each stage, At each stage, this is what it looks like at a high level, a medium level, and a low level, so we understand how people can improve. We build a comprehensive profession development system that builds on the instructional framework. We build a comprehensive assessment system of formative, summative, and progress monitoring that measures students where they are and where they're going. And then also have the accountability structures in place to measure school growth, to measure district growth, and really to get a deep dive into what teachers are doing and how students are performing. Even though Boulder Valley is 31,000 students, we should know how each and every single child is progressing, what plan we have in place and what path we have for every child. And we have to then monitor multiple times along the way. So right now what we do is I've built a team where they have a special set of schools that they monitor. And every 5 weeks we do a deep dive in those schools. We call them the 5-week reviews. We're essentially looking at behavior, attendance, and grades. And we want to see how are our students doing in behaviors, which students are struggling, and we kind of tier them, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and we put interventions in place. And then we come back after those 5 weeks and we measure how successful the interventions were. If the interventions were successful, we continue them. If they weren't successful, we try something else. We do that for attendance, we do that for, and we do that for grades. We've seen a lot of success. We've reduced out-of-school suspensions by 55%. In the first year alone, we saw a 0.25% overall increase in GPAs, and we're still struggling with attendance. But essentially it comes down to having a system that you put in place and something that you monitor and something that you work towards. And I say this all the time, once you build that cycle of improvement, the accelerated growth happens in the monotony of doing it day in and day out. I don't know if I answered your question though.
Good chat.
I mean, I was trying. I was struggling with that one. Sorry.
This district has 3 well-represented active employee groups: certificated employees, classified employees, and para-educators. Can you provide some background on your history with labor unions and associations in your work and your views toward them?
So I've had good relationships with labor unions. In Chicago, as a building principal, as a deputy chief, as a chief, we never had any labor strife working with Chicago teachers unions. Coming into Ohio was a challenge. So understand, I was tapped to do the state takeover. The state takeover was a big part of it. It gives operational, managerial, and instructional control to the CEO, replacing a school board. And by year 3, gives me unilateral powers to go in and make any change to a contract that I desire, as long as it doesn't lower benefits and wages. That's a very scary thought for somebody that is working with me in a union or wants to negotiate a contract. I've had 31 grievances. I've had 2 unfair labor practices. Not one grievance has gone to arbitration. We've resolved all of them. One ULP, I won. And the ULP was I was trying to give the teachers a raise and they didn't want to let me. I don't know. And the second ULP was they removed. We were able to work that out too. They withdrew it. So I say that because even though I have the power to go and to unilaterally change a contract, I don't believe that that's the right course of action. I think you have to work with labor unions. I think you have to come to an agreement. I think you have to collaborate. And once you have an agreement on what it is that you say you're going to do, you work together and you do it. And you don't try and circumvent a contract. And you just, if there's something that you really don't like, you just wait to collective bargaining and you go in and you hammer it out there. So.
As our world continues to divide us on our differences, how can we as a school district unite our students with compassion, listening skills, understanding, and acceptance for all populations at all grades?
Some things I think you have to explicitly teach. So this summer I read a book, Unselfie. I don't know if anyone read Unselfie. It's about teaching empathy. And I had the author come in and train all of my preschool teachers because I wanted my preschool teachers to teach empathy like you would teach reading, math, social studies, and science. When I look at something like social emotional learning, I've partnered with CASTLE, which has been ran by Tim Shriver, been in existence for over 20 years. they're helping us roll out social emotional learning to all of our children and to our teachers as well. I think it's something that you have to specifically teach. I think it's something that has to become a philosophy and part of and ingrained in your school day. Something we're also doing is, right now I'm serving a low-income population that has a lot of trauma. We do meditation every single day in our schools through Inner Explorer. So there's some parts of this have to happen within that just get specifically taught, and you make time for it. Some things are taught through instruction and through instructional practices, and that's why I think it's so important, kind of like what I talked about earlier, why it's so important for collaborative instruction to exist in classrooms. And so that's why I did choose that framework that I used, the graduate release of responsibility, because the majority of the time students were working together. You have to teach them academic discourse. You have to teach them how to engage with each other in a respectful way. And once they know how to do that, that's when they understand how to talk. They understand how to disagree. One of the other last thing that we did that I have a lot of experience with is, we shifted the entire student code of conduct to become more based in restorative practices. And so, clearly I know there's not a huge issue here with discipline, but my whole take on it is, could be summed up in a very simple sentence. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach them to read. If a child doesn't know how to do math, we teach them math. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we suspend them. Doesn't make any sense. So the whole thought about restorative practices, we have to help children understand, what is it that you did wrong? This is the consequence for doing it. This is what you need to do the next time so you don't make a mistake. And this is how you repair the harm. We engage children. We give them an opportunity to show others how they have hurt them, whether it be a fight or name calling or bullying, whatever it is. And then we also, as we need to, we get parents involved. So I think when you start looking at those types of things, the meditation, the social emotional learning, the restorative practices, teaching empathy, those are important skills. I think some skills here in Boulder that I would really want to dive deeper into would be persistence. How do we teach persistence? I don't know if anyone's ever read maybe Paul Tuff's book, How Children Succeed, that whole thing about grit. And so, looking at the ACEs surveys, because I do believe that children, even in populations like Boulder, still come from trauma. There are things that are happening in their lives that we maybe not know about, but we have to build relationships with our kids so we can understand divorce, we can understand anxiety, we can understand drug dependence, alcohol dependence, because it's happening to our kids. And if we don't take the time to build systems and train our educators to work with that, to understand how to spot that, I think that it's an opportunity lost. So, here in Boulder, those are some areas I'd probably want to look at and see if there's an appetite to really help our children learn how to battle through some of the issues that they may have in their home life, but also how to build resistance and grit and really learn from failure. I think that's the biggest thing. I grew up in Skokie. I don't know if you guys know anything about Skokie. It's a high-performing area. It's the North Shore. There's a lot of competition, and children don't fail well. And so we have to help our children understand that failure is a part of the process, that it's not the end of the world. It's okay to take risks, and to how to come back from failure, because inevitably our children are going to fail. I think another area, and I'm maybe going a little bit off topic, is kind of coming back to your question around gifted and talented, is there's a lot of research now that's showing that if we don't push our children fast enough or hard enough and get them to where they need to be, we're seeing a high dropout rate of children that were once in the gifted areas, because school was so easy for them. They never learned how to push themselves. They never learned how to struggle through learning. And when they get to a point where people are now catching up to them, they don't have the skills necessary to make it through failure, and then they end up dropping out. So those are some areas in Boulder I'd really want to explore.
BVSD has one of the largest achievement gaps in the state, and recently there have been conversations about how the distribution of district resources might be reconsidered to address this. As the BVSD superintendent, how would you lead our community to understandings and decisions about this issue?
Well, I will say this, and it's often unpopular, but you just can't throw money at a problem and expect to fix it. So I understand that you probably do want to, you may need to move some resources around, but just the mere fact of moving resources is not going to improve instruction, and it is not going to close that gap. I also want to say I don't call it an achievement gap, I call it an opportunities gap. I don't like the term achievement gap because it makes it seem like there's something wrong with children's brains. There's nothing wrong with it. What's wrong is what we're putting into it, and it's those opportunities. I'll get off my soapbox, I promise. But essentially, I think we have to have a broader conversation in the community around equity and equality. We need to understand that in our country that we are only as good as our most challenged, and we have to help others. But we also cannot do that at the peril of other students. We're not here to hold these students back and bring these students down so we can push these students up. We're not looking for mediocrity. We want acceleration for all of our students. That's why I push so hard on that growth. But when you go to those Title I schools, when you go to schools where you may see more of that achievement gap, you may want to look at doing things a little bit differently. And some different opportunities. So, I'd be very interested to see what are the opportunities we're having for families, for parents. I've worked in low-income situations with mainly Hispanic parents. I've worked in low-income situations with mainly African-American parents, and looking to see what the different needs were. So as I was working in a Hispanic neighborhood, it was, how am I helping my parents so they can help their children at home? How am I helping my parents learn English so they stop pulling their children out of school every time they need to go to the bank or every time they need to go to the doctor because their children are now the language brokers for that parent. So helping parents get jobs through GED courses, helping parents learn technology skills. Those were some of the things that we did that were a little bit different, that didn't really cost a lot of money because you could usually partner with some type of nonprofit or a higher educational institution or someone in the community. When it comes to closing the achievement gap, it really comes back down to the quality of the teacher and the autonomy that we place on those schools. So I got beat up a little bit in Chicago because I said my children are, I think at the time, 59% of them are reading at grade level. We moved that all the way up to 84%. But what I did was I looked at the time distribution and I said, this is our biggest area of struggle, so this is where we're going to spend the most time. And we redid everything. Our kids were getting 3 hours of reading instruction. Well, you know what? There are other students in this district that don't need 3 hours of reading instruction, but if our students need that, then let's provide them what they need. Because if we don't have a solid literacy framework for our children, and if children can't read, they can't do math, they can't do science, they can't do all those other subject areas because reading is inherent in all of them, including math. So as I was moving my school and outperforming 465 schools in a Hispanic neighborhood, my focus was reading. I really bought into the 90-90-90 model. And I was moving towards that. And I said that we are going to focus squarely on reading. And by doing that, everything else will improve. So by the time I was done, we moved that reading score to 82%, but it was the lowest score. Even though we focused on it the most, reading was our lowest indicator. It was 82%, math was 84%, science, or 83%, and science was 86%. Our other instruction areas improved because our literacy scores improved. Kids had better access to comprehension of those other strategies. And we also help teachers understand how to teach reading through the content areas. And so those are not things I may want to do in some schools in Boulder, but there may be some schools in Boulder that need that. And we have to be brave enough and courageous enough to say that and then put in an instructional framework that's going to work for those kids, and then support the teachers with differentiated professional development, with different types of supports from central office, and giving them the autonomy to do what's needed in the building.
What is your experience with strategic planning? Give an example of a successful initiative you put into motion.
How much time do I got left? So strategic planning, as a principal, you always build out a strategic plan for your building. And typically, as I was going through that principal role, it really didn't mean much to me. When these last 2 years, I really got an understanding of what it takes to create a strategic plan. And it has nothing to do with the words that you put on the paper. It's what you do as you go out there collecting the information from the community. So as I was building out my strategic plan last year, 2 years now, I had over 90 community meetings where I was going out, getting feedback, and trying to build this plan. And I looked on the website that you guys have, and I saw, I think that was about as much as I found on the strategic plan. It was some objectives and some goals and a mission statement. But I want to take that much more than that, and you want to operationalize. So I do have 5 goals in my strategic plan that I'm using now in Youngstown. But my strategic plan is now, I think it's an 86-page living document. And so we've broken down each goal. We've broken down goals to 3 or 4 objectives. Each objective's been broken down to 5 or 6 action steps. We define what we're going to do over the course of 3 years, and then we hold ourselves accountable through metrics to say, if I'm going to provide high-quality professional development for all teachers, then this is what I'm doing in year 1, this is what I'm doing in year 2, this is what I'm doing in year 3, and then metrics to see what is this professional development going to improve, and then hold ourselves accountable to that. For instance, one of the metrics, and this is an easy one to talk about, was we said that we were going to observe every teacher once a week. And so the first year I said it was 75%, the next year I said it was going to be 90%, the third year was going to be 100%. Right now we're at 90% in line with the strategic plan, but it was getting down to that level. Like, I'm a firm believer in that having a strategic plan that clearly articulates where you're going, how you're getting there, and how you measure it. Because you have to have that roadmap. Because I also then want to have theories of action each year. So each school would have to have a theory of action to say, this is what we're working on specifically that's going to lead us towards success of that strategic plan. And then you have to take your strategic plan and your theory of action and tie that into the budget. So if this is what we're saying we're going to do over the course of 3 years, and this is what we're doing this year, then this is what I'm spending my money on. And remember, we built this as a community. We agreed to this as a community. So when you come to me, or you come to the board and you want to spend something and it's outside of the strategic plan, it's an easier no. Because it's not me saying no, it's the strategic plan, it's our community saying, this is our focus right now. Because there are so many competing interests that exist in this world, but if we have a clear direction of where we want to go and what we want to do, we build that quality profile of what a child in Boulder Valley is, and this is a plan to get there, then we need 100% of our finances and 100% of our revenues, 100% of our efforts going towards success of that strategic plan. So when you're successful with that strategic plan, you will be successful with building that quality profile or building that child that you want to see Boulder Valley create.
So I think we're going to bring it to a close here so that people have time to kind of honor everybody's time. And we're going to be done at 8:30, so there's a little bit of time for them to fill out their cards. We don't get to, the last question was on food, and I think it's okay.
Oh, I want to answer that?
Food is so good. It's all good.
Well, I'm going to answer that, so I'm sorry. Very quickly. Because I started late. They held me up over there. I think food is so important. So I was, as a principal in Chicago, Michelle Obama came out with her Healthy Schools Initiative, and we were the first school in the state of Illinois to get the gold status. We got to go to the White House. One of my students got to introduce, I almost said Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama. And I mean, we did all that through, because I have this belief that almost as important as what we put into a child's mind through education is also how we feed that mind nutritionally. We make sure that we have exercise, we make sure we have meditation, we make sure we feed it in an appropriate way. So something that I'm doing right now in Youngstown is I'm switching food services over to an organization called Revolution Foods. Have you guys been to Whole Foods? You know how Whole Foods has their list of things that they'll never serve, those words I can't pronounce? That's essentially what Revolution Foods does, and they do it at the reimbursable rate of the Food and Drug. And so I'm really excited about bringing that in, because we're going to bring whole foods to our children. We're going to bring things that they could say and fruits that they can hold and they eat. We also do the fruits and vegetable grant, so kids get fruits and vegetables 3 times a week, so we can send it home. When I was in Chicago, in the urban city, in the South Side, I had built 32 raised beds. I had a chicken coop, and we were harvesting food. We were taking it to we were selling it at the farmer's market. There was no farmer's market, so I created a farmer's market so I could sell the food at the farmer's market so we could invest it back in. Because I wanted to teach kids not just about agriculture, I wanted to teach them the business of agriculture. So if you could imagine these poor Hispanic kids going out there with their eggs and their fruits, or not fruits, more vegetables than anything. I mean, it was just, I just light up. It's just so much fun, because it's a no curriculum, it's a no standard, but it's essentially just something that you want to impart on children as they go through life. So I'm glad you didn't ask that
Well, I
question.
didn't have to there, but thank you for that.
All right, so I will walk you back down.
Okay.
Let's see, and fill out the sheets and just leave them here.
All right. It's nice meeting everyone. Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.